Why we increased R&D spending to the highest of any government in this country, and it will have a direct impact on the issues that he raises.
Before we begin Prime Minister's questions, I'm delighted to welcome in the gallery the Speaker of the Lok Sabha of India. Right, let us move to questions to the Prime Minister. Neil Coyle.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I wish all members of this House a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts, of course, are with those affected by the recent flooding, and we thank the responders who are working hard to keep communities safe. Mr. Speaker, this week we published our elective reform plan to rebuild our NHS and end the Tory backlog. We will deliver where the previous government failed, empowering patients, boosting productivity, more care in the community and incentivising reform. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
On behalf of everyone in Southwark, and I hope the whole House, can I offer the Prime Minister condolences on the loss of his brother over Christmas and wish everyone a Happy New Year. Last July, the public overwhelmingly backed Labour's manifesto commitment to halving violence against women and girls. Can the Prime Minister set out how today's vote on the Children's Wellbeing Bill is a crucial step to delivering that promise, to protecting children, and without the delay of an unnecessary further lengthy inquiry?
Can I thank him for his remarks about my brother and the other colleagues who've sent me remarks. Mr. Speaker, he raises a very important issue. Violence against women and girls, abuse, child sexual exploitation are sickening. Many victims have been let down for a very long time by warped ideas about community relations and the protection of institutions. Mr. Speaker, he raises the question of inquiries. There have been a number of inquiries, both national and local, including one covering Oldham, and reasonable people can agree or disagree on whether a further inquiry is necessary. This morning I met some of the victims and survivors of this scandal, and they were clear with me that they want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. The J inquiry, the last national inquiry, was 7 years, which would take us with a further inquiry to 2031. I think action is what's required. But whatever your view, whatever anyone's view on whether a further inquiry is needed, what I find shocking is that anyone in this House would vote down the Children's Wellbeing Bill this afternoon, which is vital protections for the most vulnerable in our society. And I urge the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw her wrecking amendment.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House has heard that the Prime Minister lost his brother during the Christmas period. So can I offer him, on behalf of my party, our sincerest condolences? The new year has started with a focus on the decades-long rape gang scandal. Across the country, thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right. There has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her condolences, and can I thank her for reaching out over the Christmas period when I lost my brother? I really did appreciate that, and I appreciate it today. Mr. Speaker, on the question of a further inquiry, there have been a number of inquiries, some of them localised, including the Mayor of Manchester's inquiry recently, and of course a national inquiry Professor Jay carried out, took 7 years, had 20 recommendations, none of which actually were implemented by the party opposite when they were in government. Now, this is a really serious issue, and we must focus, obviously, on the victims and survivors. There's no fixed view on the victims and survivors about a further national inquiry. There are mixed views. But there is a view, and I share this view, that what is needed now is action on what we already know. We already know, myself from personal knowledge when I was Chief Prosecutor, that warped ideas Myths and stereotypes about victims are at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. The J report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me just. One of the provisions in the bill is to protect children vulnerable today who are out of school to prevent abusers ever taking those children out of school. I implore members opposite to defy the misleading leadership of the Leader of the Opposition and vote for a really important bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the J inquiry and went further, launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims. But no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture. And it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches. I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister. But Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap, and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Cryer said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does... I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But we all, Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Kemi.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse, and I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, to tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang-raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
Speaker, my constituent, Anne-Marie, and countless other armed forces families across Aldershot and Farnborough are living in shabby military accommodation that simply isn't good enough after 14 years of Conservative neglect. So can I welcome the Ministry of Defence plan to buy back thousands of homes in my constituency? And will the Prime Minister set out how sorting out this bad deal left behind by a past Tory government will make life better for Anne-Marie and others like her living in the home of the British Army?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? And we all owe extraordinary debt of thanks to those who serve. Mr. Speaker, by reacquiring over 36,000 service family homes, including 1,700 in my honourable friend's constituency, we can rapidly transform substandard accommodation. The deal that we've done also saves the taxpayer around £230 million per year in rent, and of course it follows the largest pay rise for the armed forces in over 20 years. There is of course still work to do, but this is a major step forward.
We now come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I join others by offering my personal condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his brother? And can I take this opportunity to express my sadness at the passing of a much-loved member of the Liberal Democrat family, Baroness Jenny Randerson. Mr. Speaker, fixing the care crisis is urgent. For the millions of people, elderly and disabled, who are not getting the care they need, for the millions of family carers who are making huge sacrifices to fill the gap, for the NHS, where over 12,000 people are stuck in hospital beds because they can't get out of hospitals and care is not there for them. The Prime Minister is right to say we need a cross-party approach today, but as Sir Andrew Dillot has said today, that needn't take 3 years. So will the Prime Minister please speed up this work so 2025 is the year we finally rise to the challenge of fixing care?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this important issue and thank him for his condolences. Yes, it is right we need to get this right. I'm on a cross-party consensus on this and invite him to work with us on this, as I know he will. But it is important, and he's right to say we need some action now as well. And that is why it's important I point out the immediate action that we've taken, the £3.7 billion of additional funding in the budget for social care, another £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to live more independent lives, and of course the increased carers allowance. And the way in which we've set this up is in stages so that we can act and improve as we go along, but making sure that we've got consensus for the bigger changes that may be proposed in the review. And I do invite him and members across the House to work with us on this so that we can get this right and make sure that what we put in place endures beyond just a few years. Thank you.
Red David.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid if the government doesn't bring in these long-term social care reforms this year, their NHS reforms, this Parliament will fail. So I hope he will revisit the timetable. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, while the honourable member for Clacton may miss out on his big allowance from Elon Musk, the spectre of the richest man in the world trying to buy a British political party should give us all pause for thought. And after years of the Conservatives taking millions in pounds of Russian money, will the Prime Minister now work with us to bring in long overdue reforms of party funding so that power in this country lies with the voters and not wealthy overseas oligarchs?
I think we all had a smile on Sunday when the honourable member said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. Just a few hours later, that's the rough and tough of politics. And of course, we're looking at the question of funding more generally.
Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the efforts this Labour government has made to reset our relationship with the European Union and to seek to remove unnecessary trade barriers. The trading links between the UK and mainland Europe are of particular importance to my constituency of Ashford. So would the Prime Minister support my efforts and those of other Kent colleagues to restore international train service to Ashford International Station that will help economic growth in my constituency, Kent and wider South East?
Prime Minister.
Right. Thank my honourable friend for raising this question. Businesses in his constituency have been badly let down by the deal of the last government, and we, of course, are resetting and strengthening that relationship on the economy, on energy, on security to deliver the growth that we need. I know this is an issue of considerable frustration to his constituents. The decision in question, Mr Speaker, is ultimately for Eurostar, but we are keen to see international services reinstated to Ashford as soon as possible, and I would be happy for the Rail Minister to update him on the latest discussions.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr Speaker, can I begin by doing something unusual, which is to commend the Prime Minister on his earlier answers to the Leader of the Opposition and, of course, to pass on my party's condolences to him for the loss of his brother. Outside of this place, temperatures continue to plummet, energy bills continue to rise, and the winter fuel allowance has been unacceptably taken away from so many vulnerable pensioners. Now, the Prime Minister intimated prior to Christmas that he had no regrets about any of the decisions that he has taken in office. Does he understand that the public do?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his condolences. We took some tough decisions. They led to a budget which delivered the largest settlement since devolution began to Scotland. If he thinks we should now reverse that, then he should say so. What it's done is it's given the money, so now the SNP have the money, they have the power, and no more excuses for the non-delivery that we see in Scotland. If he wants me to reverse that, he should say so.
Sam Rushworth.
Mr Speaker. Feeling safe in your own community is among the most basic of human needs, but after 14 years of Tory cuts to Durham's frontline police and breaking the criminal justice system, too many of my constituents are victims of violence, theft and antisocial behaviour, and these crimes too often go unpunished. Now, I know the Prime Minister has had a lifelong commitment to protecting victims, so what assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that our new government will be tough on crime and on the causes of crime?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, he's right to raise this important issue, and I have to say, when he said there were cuts to polices and somebody said boring, I think that somebody opposite just said boring. That tells you everything you need to know about the last 14 years. He's right. We need to crack down on those committing vile acts in our communities. And that's why our plan for change puts 13,000 extra police and PCSO officers into neighbourhood policing, 3.5% real terms increase, and of course tough new respect orders. Where they lost control, we'll take back control and deliver safe and secure communities.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent Dipak first opened the doors to his pharmacy in 1991, and he's been serving the Chelmsford community ever since, greeting many of his patients by name. But Dipak's business is struggling. His NHS contract no longer covers the cost of the drugs he has to dispense. For example, he's sometimes been forced to pay over 100 times more for a particular mental health drug than his contract provides. Dipak is dipping into his life savings to keep his pharmacy afloat, and I'm sure that many other pharmacists across the country are doing the same. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no pharmacist should be forced to use their own money to keep their pharmacy viable?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising this really important and challenging case? Community pharmacists like Dipak play a vital role in our health service. And as she knows, the Department of Health and Social Care sets drug tariff prices and regularly assesses what pharmacies are reimbursed to ensure overall they're paid fairly. If she would prepare to share the details further with me, I will look and have a review by the team of the particular case that she's raised with me. Thank you.
Mark Seward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last year, I was honoured to accept an invitation from the European Jewish Association to go to Krakow and discuss the role of Holocaust education in tackling the rising tide of anti-Semitism across Europe. We also visited Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where we laid wreaths and paid tributes to the many victims of the Holocaust. Given that this month marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of those evil places, will the Prime Minister set out what this government is doing on Holocaust education to ensure that never again means never again?
Well, I thank him for raising this. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and has no place whatsoever in our society. Mr Speaker, I recently met with Jewish community leaders in Downing Street to discuss what further we can do to combat anti-Semitism, and that includes allocating £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work, committing to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, and providing at least £2.2 million to continue the funding Lessons from Auschwitz. And I look forward to working with others on those important proposals.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Businesses like Hicks in Harpenden, charities like the Hospice of St Francis in Berkhamsted, health and social care providers like the Elms Medical Practice in Harpenden, a GP, are amongst those up and down this country who are warning the government about the negative impact of the proposed changes to national insurance contributions. When will the Prime Minister heed those warnings and, at the very least, look at exemptions for health and social care providers like they have for the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Thank you for raising this. Look,